Hi, this is John Powers, Second Ward Alderman for the City of Lake Forest, and this is the Lake Forest Podcast.
The Lake Forest Podcast is supported by viewers, listeners, and businesses just like you. Looking for the best pool supplies? Look no further than Dohany's Pool Supplies. With a history dating back to 1967, this family-owned business offers everything families need to keep their pools clean and sparkling, from chemicals to equipment. Plus, customers enjoy free shipping on all orders. Visit Dohany's Pool Supplies today at doheny.com, DOHENY.com, to learn more. Forest Bluff Real Estate Team serves Illinois, Wisconsin, Lake Forest, and Lake Bluff. John Josephitis, Laura Lee Van Fleet, and of course Michelle Parnell. Get a free market analysis now at forestbluffrealestate.com. For the best cannabis in the world, look no further than Iliad Epic Grow. Owned by Lake Bluff's own Rich Ruzich, they are a cannabis cultivation center focusing on hard-to-find small batch products that will delight both the occasional user and ganjier. When visiting Michigan, ask for it by name. Epic Products, exceptional process. For more information, email info@iliadgrow.com. Havey Communications has been helping first responders arrive safely since 1983. It's owned by Lake Forest's own Mike Havey. Check them out at haveycommunications.com. We'd also like to say we're thankful for our Patreon supporters: Costa, Lance, Otto, RDM, John C., and Helen. Shout out to the Lake Forest Breakfast Group, Broad Stop and Captain Mike's in Kenosha, the Greentown Tavern, and the Frolic Lounge in Waukegan.
Yeah, I got my souvenir. I caught a baseball on Friday.
Yeah, look at this guy. Caught a foul ball.
Nice.
Yep. So
I was down there.
Got that out there now.
I went down Sunday and sat at Murphy's for 4 hours during pouring rain, and then home at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
My college or my adult son and all his college buddies down there. So
Yeah.
We did NASCAR this weekend, so we were.
Yeah, I thought the NASCAR thing actually worked better than I had expected. You know, I mean, to me, as a Chicagoan, watching TV of people driving is like, what?
I know. I watched it when I got home. I dialed it up to watch it. It just seemed too slow for me.
It was the highest rated NASCAR broadcast in I think 7 years or 8 years.
Yeah,
many years. So it would. I mean, I've been a NASCAR fan for a long time, and it's weird because I'm also lifelong Chicagoan, and those two worlds
right. Those
are mutually
don't
exclusive. You know, I mean, NASCAR is like Waffle House, you know, and it's very, but you know, they had.
I like Waffle House too.
Yeah, so do I. Oh, I love it. I got the belly to prove it. But they for years they used to have a race in Joliet, and that's a haul. And that I have a friend that is got a connection to NASCAR and goes to every track. He said that the Joliet track was the worst track they had in terms of crowd management, and it took forever to get out, and it's a single lane road to the interstate, and awful. So this was in my office, which unfortunately we're moving later in a few months, but my office is on Michigan Avenue. We just went to my office and just watched it and brought the kids there and used the conference room.
Perfect.
That?
Yeah.
I said you brought some scratch-offs. Alderman John Powers, or AJP, welcome to the Lake Forest Podcast, my friend.
Thank you.
Good morning, Alderman. Great to see you.
First time as Alderman. We've spoken many times regarding the Friends of Parks and Rec. Even though you were on it a long time ago, you keep correcting me, and you give all the credit to Rick Amos, but that's how we started on this show, isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's as you guys know, especially if you attended the event last night. I mean, it continues to be a fantastic community event, and shared between Lake Forest and Lake Bluff, right? Lake Bluff does the parade in the morning. Lake Forest and the Friends of Lake Forest Park and Rec Foundation do the festival and fireworks. So it was a little bit of an adjustment yesterday, as you know, from all the work that's being done back there, which I think is both ahead of schedule and ahead of budget, which is always a good thing. But Sally Swarthout and the whole team in Parks and Rec, and Rick's there to kind of orchestrate a lot of it, but it's a perfect example of kind of the volunteer spirit of our community, which makes it, I think, certainly a gem on the North Shore and a great place to live.
This was my first time going to it. A year ago, I was in my basement packing boxes to move to Lake Forest. We went to both the parade. We had one of our kids was in one of the parade units, and we watched from the Newcomers Club member hosted a nice thing on the one of the streets there where the parade was on. But last night was just, we're a little worried about the rain at first. We thought, but it's just a fantastic event. I mean, from start to finish. I could see you from a distance, but I never got over to chat with you, but because I was so busy talking to other folks. But
was I saving myself?
Really, those events don't just happen. They take a lot of planning, a lot of work to go into, and then be there. And the public works guys were there taking care of their stuff. And the police, of course, were there doing a great job keeping everyone safe, because I know that whenever you get large crowds now, there's always a concern about that. But it was a fantastic event, and hats off to everyone involved. And if you didn't go this year, make it a point to go next year, because it's a great time, and raised a lot of money for the foundation, which is going to do like some path on the beach or something. I'm not sure the specifics, but sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, they augment a lot of things, because as you know, the Lake Forest Park district is not a district; it's a line item in the city budget. So the foundation helps to kind of support some of those above and beyond projects and criteria. So it's great. And then now, officially being an alderman, you get exposed to that across the entire city landscape, right? And you realize all the different boards and commissions and city functions. You mentioned Public Works, what Mike Thomas does with that crew and those guys, and people that help make city run from that perspective is equally impressive. So as a new guy, I mean, you had skills and capability last week with Mayor Pandaleon, and you're stuck with me this week. But as a new guy, that's the very first thing that stands out. And I had the privilege to obviously be a caucus nominee, and then a chance to win in this, citywide municipal election. And stepping into that role with the responsibility that goes along with it, you quickly realize the talent of all of our city employees. And what Jason Wish has done, you think about that, Bob Kiley for over 28 years held that position. Yep. And I think Bob did a really skillful job. And then Jason steps in as kind of the new guy back then, right, 4 years ago, and tries to kind of pick up where Bob left off. And I think he's certainly demonstrated the ability to do that. And I think he's also, and I've been exposed to it a little bit, but just a small amount. But as he starts thinking about, succession planning across the city landscape, I think he has really done a nice job, start identifying the skills and capabilities within all those departments, and how do we need to augment that. So that my first impression would really be that it's the people that we're blessed to have work with us and for us within the city. And they treat Lake Forest like it's their own. Now, for many of them, it is, right? They live in town, but for quite a few, it's not. But that spirit from which they do their job has been really impressive.
So to close out the 4th of July, Also, shout out to Joe Aridi, treasurer, Parks and Rec, and our poor boy Rick Amos. Man, at 5 o'clock when that first band was going to hit and it started raining, I'm like, oh, dude, no, come on. And then it cleared up. So Rick, all the blame, no
Yeah.
credit.
Great job. Great job to all.
Great job. So back to you, AJP or Alderman John Powers. How did the process work to get to be alderman? Because we had 1,400 new families move into town, and some of them think that the caucus is the newcomers club. Can you clue in everybody what the process is to become an alderman?
Yeah, so my wife and I moved back into the community back in 1995, right? So it's
Were you here before then?
What's that, Rick?
I'm sorry, were you here before then as well, John?
I grew up
moved back to the community.
Kid. So I had the pleasure of living in Lake Bluff in my childhood through 8th grade. I attended St. Mary's Elementary School from kindergarten through 8th grade, and got to experience everything Lake Bluff is, right? From everything we talked about at the top, at the Lake Bluff Parade, to Lake Bluff baseball, to everything that Lake Bluff had to offer. So when my wife and I
town to raise kids.
Yeah, it's spectacular. I mean, I'm the luckiest guy I know. I mean, by far. So I had that wonderful experience. I'm one of 6, so many of my brothers and sisters got to experience it for a little bit as well. But when my wife and I we knew we were moving back. We were downtown in Lincoln Park. We got transferred to Colorado. We lived in Denver for 2 years. And when we knew we were coming back, this was the first place we kind of zeroed in on. So kind of a long preamble into, Pete, your real question. I'm at a block party that summer that we moved in, and Bob Kiley is my neighbor, and George Pandaleon is my neighbor, and Bill Avery at the time, who was on Plan Commission, was my neighbor, and the topic of caucus came up. And they're like, are you familiar with the caucus? And I said, no, I don't know anything about it, never heard of it. And they kind of walked me through, it's a group of community volunteers that are trying to seek out other volunteers to serve on board and commissions. So the block party was on a Sunday, and Monday morning my phone rang with the president of the caucus to explore my interest in getting involved, which I did. And so I think that, the genesis of that whole thing is kind of a volunteer profile sheet, which I believe they still use earnestly. And you just kind of, you explain to them what you do. And I'm kind of a career sales, business and development guy. And you identify your interests, your current skill sets, and they try to blend you into the ward. So obviously there's
and John, to cut in, that VPS volunteer profile sheet can be found on the caucus website. You fill it out, and there's check boxes. What are you interested in to volunteer? Because it's all volunteering, right?
Absolutely. And so to fast forward it to how you become alderman, you're identified by your ward. So I had several initial conversations, and I got the invite to go in front of the entire 2nd ward and have that conversation, which is just general interest, questions, experience, interest level, right? And I think George has mentioned this in the past. I certainly know Mayor Tack has mentioned this. Honestly, it wasn't a position I sought after. But Lake Forest is a town I love, and I'm a huge believer in stewardship, which is giving your time, your talent, and your treasure to your community. And so when I received the phone call, I received a phone call a couple of years ago, and it wasn't the right time. My travel schedule was crazy. My wife at the time was still working. We were both traveling. So we were trying to manage that along with kids in college. So that wasn't right. But when I received the call over a year ago, I told him I'd gladly sit down and have the conversation. And for me, honestly, the process is very effective. And I told him, if I'm not your guy, the process worked because you found somebody that is, man or woman, doesn't matter. And so I was happy to go through the process and see how it worked out. And I, was fortunate enough to go through.
When you say the process, John, hold on. I mean, you had somebody from the ward chairman and the group talk to you, or how did that? Because you have to do a couple interviews, right? Before you.
Yeah, several. So I went through probably 3 different ward interviews. The third being the full second ward. So everybody that's the member, all my neighbors, were able to ask questions and, figure out what your interests are, or most importantly, whether or not you have an agenda, right? And my agenda is to try to leave Lake Forest in a better place than when my wife and I had a chance to move here in 1995. And so I've served on the caucus. I've done numerous different volunteer positions at St. Mary's, both school and parish. I went through the caucus process and served as the District 115 member board of education. So, you got exposed to multiple aspects of the community, and was thrilled to have the opportunity to give back in that regard. So,
John, this last year, we had quite a bit of controversy in the caucus over a couple of different issues. Do you think that we're going to have to make some structural changes to the caucus? Or do you think that this was just a random, just a one-off kind of a problem?
Look, I think there's always the idea of growth and expanding skill, capability, et cetera. So Chris Bennis, who's the president of the caucus, I think knows exactly what went wrong, how there might have been some gaps in bylaws or in the process, and then make sure that process is fixed. It's validated by the caucus members, particularly the executive committee, and it's in place going forward. It was, I wasn't intimately involved other than my role as one of the candidates for the second ward aldermanic position. But I've been through it before, and I was I didn't understand the vote. I'm like, what are we voting on? I'm happy to go to
that did seem to be the issue. Yes.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm happy to go to the annual meeting. I'm happy to say a few words. I'm honored to be your recommended candidate going on the ballot. But the only vote that matters is the municipal election. And so that was a new process to me from when I served on the caucus. My wife served on the caucus as well. So that was a little surprising to me, but I have all the confidence in the world that, the community volunteers that now make up the caucus can kind of go through and vet that and make sure that's the right.
It does sound like it was in large measure a bylaws issue. That led to
that. I honestly haven't read the bylaws in many years. So for me to
we'll put a link right up here because
I read them quite a bit in the fall.
We did a podcast. Here's the link 2 years ago. The bylaws were down for a period of time, almost half a year. Some things were going on. You can watch it. You can hear what the opinions are from 2 years ago. Now it's 2023. And to me, what I've seen going through everything, it comes down to communication. And there's because we have, new media, right? Oh my God, now you're throwing in artificial intelligence. People are trying
We're not intelligent.
Artificially
or otherwise.
But people are trying to figure out, well, what should I say? What should I not say? And then you don't say anything. And then you have the communication stalled. It's back over here. And then everybody else doesn't have it. Leaning towards a podcast we did with Joe, who is the treasurer of Lake County?
Ali Kim.
Yeah.
You have her refreshing way of communicating on how the government works, the pluses and minuses.
That was a good show. Yeah.
Obviously, that's Lake County. This is Lake Forest, but it comes down to communication where people only want to hear what they want to hear. They're only going to look at the headlines. They're going to 2 sentences in. They don't even watch a minute anymore. I have to figure out how to get something down in 30 seconds so people will watch it. and then they get pissed because it's taken out of context. In your short term as alderman, or back when you were on the caucus, what were some of the conflicts that you saw in communication? Because things happen behind closed doors, I get it, but some things can also be put out in the public. What have you seen where, hey, you know what, we could be a little bit more transparent?
Well, look, one of the reasons I'm on this podcast right now is because of that, right? So I was very vocal going through the caucus interviews. One of the questions I was asked is, hey, based upon your experience in the past, what do you think you did well and what do you think you didn't do well? And the very first thing I don't think I did well, personally speaking, is a connectivity to the community. So when I was on District 115 school board, you have to balance the respect for the superintendent and what Mike Simick's wishes were at the time and Mike's leadership style. And Mike is certainly a guy I respected. We didn't always get along, but I certainly respected the role that he had. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to complicate it, right? And it's the same conversation I've had with Jason Wisha. He's trying to spin a lot of plates as it relates to the city of Lake Forest. So they're doing all kinds of push communication. But back to your point, I'm on this podcast today because I want to make sure that my voice is heard across the largest constituency possible. And people can argue what percentage does the Lake Forest podcast, what percentage of the community do you connect with? It probably varies all over the place.
Greater than zero.
Well, exactly. And it depends how people feel any given day, right? And so I'm willing to make myself available on any platform at any time to have an honest, straightforward conversation, just so people understand how things work a little bit better. And that's not to say that I'm the subject matter expert. I mean, at this point, I can be a mile wide and an inch deep, right? I think I'm 2 months into it. We've had 3-4, meetings. And it's really important for the community to know, as a standing alderman, I have zero power when I'm sitting here talking to you guys. The only time an alderman has any kind of power is when the meeting's called to order and you're sitting on the dais with, my seven other elected aldermen. And you're asked to weigh in on certain decisions. So,
you act as a board. You don't act as individual aldermen the way that some aldermen do in Chicago, for example.
Exactly. We're all at-large members, right? So even though Ted Notes and I represent the second ward, and the second ward isn't any more important or less important than any other, and we've experienced that recently with some of the discussions we've had, with the McKinley Road project and some of the future development that has either already been in front of the city council or will be in front of the city council probably multiple times in coming years. It's just important to be able to connect to people and so that they know they can reach out and have, what I'd like to think is kind of an open, honest conversation. I've had multiple conversations with my neighbors on all kinds of issues. And in several of them, I promised them, my dad always used to say, I'd rather have a quick no than a long maybe, right? So if something's going to happen, if somebody wants a stop sign in front of their house because people are speeding through their neighborhood, there's a process to go through in order to vet whether or not it makes sense. But the likelihood of people getting a quick solution where before school starts, there's going to be a stop sign there, the answer is probably no. It's not going to happen. It doesn't work that way. Make sure that people understand where to go and who to talk to. I could be the first phone call, but I'm certainly not the most capable. The city staff is the appropriate people to do that. And Chief Waldorf is actively involved in a lot of the stuff for the community. When we talk about scooters and electric bikes, I mean, I've been in dozens of those conversations over the last 2 months.
Yeah.
It's always
that is a hot issue in the central business district, because you can see the kids riding these motorized vehicles on the sidewalk.
There's going to be a bad headline on that, guys, and then all of a sudden things will get done. But unfortunately, that's how it works. Alderman John, what is the downside to coming on to a podcast to give information? Why would somebody not want to give somebody a platform? If the platform reaches X amount of people, again, greater than zero, what is the downside versus the upside? Because it seems to me on the other side, yes, you can't talk about litigation, but hey, man, you live in Ward 2. You're the guy, you and Todd, Alderman Todd. This is the stuff. These are the issues that are going on. Okay. You don't just represent Alderman 2, you represent, the entire city, but your focus should be on Ward 2. What's the downside to talking about what's going on in Ward 2?
All I can do is speak for myself and be the person I am. My dear friends, close friends, and neighbors are going to be the judge as to whether or not I'm consistent in what I say and what I do, and how I act. Right. So I'm open to any platform. Okay. I don't know that I want to go on the I hate puppies platform because, I don't know what that audience looks like. Right.
We love puppies, for the record.
Yeah, we're a pro puppy.
Me too, for the record.
Yeah.
But look, the more dialogue we can have that isn't disruptive, right? The minute I get on here and I start pontificating, or I have real important agenda items that I want to try to, I think I try to skillfully position within the community, it's the process is broken, and I broke it, right? I think the one thing Skoo always used to say is, the process doesn't work when people process, and I would put myself in that position. The minute I take a stance and want to be very vocal about my aldermanic position is more important than anybody else's, that's a problem. Now, I'd like to think many of my other colleagues and elected aldermen, would feel comfortable over time. I think there's always that respectability thing, which is huge, because if I start saying things that are disruptive to the community or get misinterpreted to the greater community, and Jason has to mop it all up, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. So long-winded way to say, Pete, I'm very comfortable telling you what I think and feel. I'll never talk about anything I don't know.
Okay. John, I hear you, and you, Alderman John, you may be new to alderman, but you're talking like one.
Well, let me say, that's a big change from some of the times I spent at the Lantern. I talk about stuff I don't know about all the time.
I don't know what you're talking about. But here, let's dip our toe in the water here. What is unique about Ward 2? Like, what's going on in Ward 2? Some of the issues that you can talk about, and let's see if we cause an uproar about that.
So let me just quote Mayor Tack. Sometimes city government is boring, right? And when it works well, it still can be. That's when it's boring.
It can be good.
Ward 2 I love Ward 2. Obviously, it's my home. My kids grew up here. I'm so blessed that most of our neighbors, we're the least tenured on our neighborhood. I think George mentioned last week, he and Peggy have been in the neighborhood for 35 years. So what's unique about Ward 2, I think, are our neighborhoods. We have so many wonderful neighborhoods.
What is the area for Ward 2?
Where is Ward 2?
I'll put a map right here.
It's the ponds. It's a weird shaped ward. It's the least populated ward over time, right? Because the growth has come in other parts of town. Right now, the Lake County is working on, shoring up the Skokie ditch, right, where there's been some erosion issues. That's probably the biggest project that's been underway in our ward. So far, so good. The great thing about, I think, the city of Lake Forest is there's lots of activity, like Northcroft Park, for example. That's going through a visionary process that was completed about a month ago. They're looking at doing more things for that park for that neighborhood or our neighborhoods within our ward. Great things happening everywhere. And if people educate themselves and do a little homework on what's going on.
What's the one thing you wish you would have known before you took the role as alderman in how long you been an alderman now, John?
Since the end of May.
Okay.
You got sworn in the first meeting in June.
Do you happen to have the badge? Can you show us the badge?
Yeah, we're looking at the badge.
We'll put it right here. All right.
The badge, it's in my kitchen drawer, which is not necessarily within arm's distance. So
that's a good place for it.
Yeah.
Things will go well for me if the badge stays in the kitchen drawer
Yeah.
for my entire tenure, however short or long that might be.
So you got the gig, like, wow, I didn't know it was going to be like this, or you haven't been into it, long enough, because when you're outside looking in and then when you're inside looking out, I know you can't share everything, but is there just something like, wow, I didn't know it was going to be like this so early on?
To be honest with you, no, because I'm very used to this from my school board experience, right? There's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of differences too, but the way it works. So I'd first answer your question by saying no, there's been no surprises at this point. Number two, I would anchor in, I think it's my job as an alderman, or certainly one of the 8, to make sure that city government works efficiently and effectively. And there's a lot of mundane stuff there. Back to Randy's comment about, government can be boring. It is blocking and tackling and the efficiency of making sure it works, which I think is probably the number one priority. I think the number 2 priority, as I see it, again, as new guy, is kind of having the thoughtful vision and planning, like anticipate what that's going to look like, which is sometimes easier said than done. And when I say that, it's largely, what do we want the city of Lake Forest? It's got to work 20 years from now, not just 2. Right. And when I spoke at the annual meeting for the caucus and was introduced, I kind of made the comment that says, look, we have generational families that are here, 2nd, 3rd generation, maybe even some 4th generations, right? We have legacy families, which I'd throw myself in. We've been here a fair amount of time where we've raised our kids have attended the schools here, and they're now young adults or adults. And then we have a lot of new families. And what do all 3 of those constituencies have in common? They've made Lake Forest their home. So one doesn't necessarily overpower the other. Now, sometimes we see and witness that, right? Because when you have a whole legacy, or you've got experience spread over 40 years, you can talk about what works and what doesn't work and what you liked and what you didn't like. But the reality is, this is about all of us as one community trying to move forward and working together. And I think the city does a great job of trying to create multiple vehicles to get that message out, right? So Pete, back to your question about why wouldn't people go on the podcast? I don't think it's a reason they wouldn't, but when people try to control the message in a thoughtful, fact-based way, which is really Jason's responsibility with Dana Olson, of course, is to make sure, are we sending timely communications out to people as to what's going on at Deer Path Park and what's that mean about the traffic on Deer Path for the summer, right? When we were restoring the beach, did we properly communicate that? We're all exhausted with construction based upon the pumping station, right? And everything that went and occurred there. The pumping station, I think, end result, it's up, it's running. We haven't really been tested about how effective it is, but it was an incredibly important and strategic project for all of the city. But
we had a lot of rain on Sunday, and I didn't see any flooding in there.
Yeah, we had the biggest. Well, I think it hit the city of Chicago harder, but that was the biggest rain for Chicago since I think 1987.
Did they turn the crank?
They flip the switch. The gerbils are running.
Flip the switch. Get the marmot going extra fast in there.
Yeah, no trees needed to be turned. I think Chicago had up to 9 inches of rain. We here like 1.25 inches. So
No.
Huge difference, but you guys get the point. And that's in place to solve those types of 9-inch rain problems. So,
Yes.
look, communication's the key. I think, the other thing might be, again, while I'm on the podcast, is just honest dialogue, right? So if I think about kind of the third, and they're not necessarily in good, better, best or priorities in 1, 2, and 3, but honest dialogue with my neighbors, with you guys, with city workers, to learn and understand. Right now, I'm a huge believer, and I said this in the caucus. I had a boss that pounded this into me for years and years, was see one, do one, teach one, right? When you're trying to learn a job, and understand kind of key projects or what needs to be managed, you witness somebody doing it first. And we've had wonderful examples of people that have come before me that have done that very skillfully. Jim Preschlack, I think, is one of those, as he's finishing his last year on his third term. Then you start participating and doing it yourself, right? So that's where you gain confidence and understanding and really figure out if you're any good at it, right? And then the last piece is you teach other people to do it, right? You can show and demonstrate and lead. And I think there's a whole dais of people that can easily fulfill all three of those aspects. And with the experience that's on there, with Era and Eileen Weber, there's great examples of folks that, I think are very thoughtful and considerate in terms of how they take on the responsibility of their role. And that trickles right into, all our city employees who we've already talked about, I think, bend over backwards to do the right thing in a timely manner.
I'll ask Joe and Rick this question, and then John, you can pitch in because you may be biased on this one, but what is a good way to monitor how an alderman's doing? Like we had Mayor George on last week, and he likens it to, a corporate board setting. Well, if you're at a company, you do surveys, you do net promoter scores. Net promoter scores is simply a question: would you recommend so and so to a friend? Do you think it's fair to do a survey to say, hey, how do you think Alderman 2 John Powers is doing? How do you think you think that's a fair way to get feedback, Joe and Rick, or it's going to skew depending on the issues?
I will tell you, I don't really think it would work very well, just because, aldermen, as John is saying, they work as part of a team. They're really not individual gunslingers out there doing have gun will travel and going about their ward, fixing potholes or doing anything. They really work as part of a whole board. So it's awfully hard to judge one individual on whether they're doing a great job as when they're really part of a team.
John, that they had, I assume it's every year, is the ward meetings. And I'm a third ward resident, and I went to the ward meeting. It was at Croya with Alderman Goshgarian and Alderman Preschlack, and then city staff was there. I assume they did that in your ward as well.
Eventually, John's got to go sit in front of the caucus, and they got to figure out whether they're going to re-up them or not. So when you're sitting there with those 43 people, how do you know Alderman Powers, quote unquote, why should we reelect them? Well, I heard this and I heard that. But if you have some objective data that says, here's the feedback, because right now the only feedback you get are from the outliers that are pissed, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The wheel gets the grease.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, you're in the honeymoon period now, so give it another 6 months. They'll get fired up on you, John. But it would be nice to have some type of I don't know if it's quarterly or whatever, because just like being on a podcast to get your message out, you should. I'm not saying you personally, but an elected official should be open to whatever source that's out there that's getting feedback in. We did an alderman survey last year, and some interesting things, came up. Some aldermen are more communicative than others, and it's a good way to get ahead of things. That's why I bring it up, Because it seems to me if we don't want to do one, it's like, well, I don't want to know the information. That's why I brought it up, guys.
Well, I think there's an element of, people need to understand kind of what's going on, right? Like, let's use me as an example. If I all of a sudden am on your podcast every month, something's broken, right? Because then the portion of the community that dials in to the Lake Forest podcast only hears John Powers and doesn't hear any of my
The Second Ward podcast.
Yes, exactly. And even smaller than that, right? Because if Ted Notes isn't on it with me, right? You can't have more than 2 people on anyway because of Open Meetings Act and all that.
Don't worry. Ted doesn't say much.
It makes it complicated. But let me go back to the question about ward meetings, and then most specifically, Pete, yours about, how people could review me as to whether I'm good, bad, or indifferent.
Right.
So I did attend our second ward meeting, the last one. It was Melanie Rummel's last meeting, right? And she dedicated 6 years and did a lot of fantastic things, and has been, a 40+ year community volunteer in Lake Forest. So, she and Ted ran that meeting, which I thought was very effective. It was fine. All the city department heads were there, so you could clear up any misconceptions that the community thought. But Ted and I have subsequently talked about it, and we both kind of agreed we need to create kind of a less formal format so that there's more dialogue and question and answer. And then maybe that's where people pull in, hey, Powers, I heard you say this on the podcast. Can you further explain what you meant or understood, right? Assuming somebody witnesses that or observed it. Or you made these comments in a meeting, or I was reading the meeting minutes and here's what, you said. Is that what you intended to say? Then you get a better chance to try to vet, hey, am I truly practicing what I preach? See one, do one, teach one, to try to make the community better, or is something else going on? And as we all know, the first olive out of the jar for me will be in front of the second ward at the appropriate time a year from now, as to whether or not I'm going to be a second ward nominee for the caucus, and then subsequently the caucus nominee to run for a second term. And it's totally their prerogative. And as we know, the caucus is going to continue to change over. So it's important for, I think, elected officials to be able to reach out to the community. And I think it's important, whether it's Ted and I talked about, putting up a table in one of our driveways and having coffee on a Saturday morning, and anybody who wants to drive by, walk by, can stop and hang out for a period of time and ask questions and meet some of their other neighbors, and we can develop a list of issues or concerns that people have. The more formats that we can create, or platforms we can create, that gets input from our neighbors in our community, I think the better off we're all going to be. People don't like surprises, right? Good or bad. The minute somebody's surprised about something, or something's, unfolding within the community that they weren't aware of, it creates frustration. It can create anger. But a lot of these things go back years and years. When you look at the McKinley Road project, that didn't just pop out of the ground in a year. That had been in discussions for quite some time. And I know there's some complexities to it, most of which I'm not familiar with. And I didn't bother to go back and educate myself on all the stuff that had already been asked and answered and voted on and approved. So it's not that I was lazy and didn't want to know it. It's just there's no role for me to play there going forward, except learn from that experience and be better prepared when it pops up 2 or 3 years from now.
I've found over the years, a lot of times people, they make a choice in not voting because they're happy with things. When is turnout higher? It's usually when people are upset about something. Even presidential elections, when the economy's strong and, whoever the incumbent president is gets reelected by a landslide, the turnout's lower. So I think, I vote in every election. I've voted in every election since I turned 18, but I think a lot of people are essentially casting a vote either in elections or coming to these meetings because they're happy with things, so they don't see the need to invest their time. Because, like you said, John, people got a million other things going on with families and work and stuff, and it is hard to get into that. So I think sometimes, but as a result, the negative to that is the only people that come out, particularly to, commission meetings and other types of meetings, tend to be the people upset. And for every person that's upset about an issue or against an issue, I'm just saying people choose. Sometimes people vote by not voting. Some people choose to voice their opinion by not voicing their opinion.
Well, and I would say in recent times, people vote against something more than for something, right?
Very good point.
I'll give you a top line example, right? Presidential elections. Senator Clinton didn't get elected because of the disapproval numbers that she had and so many people that didn't want her to be president. And then in comes Donald Trump, and President Trump didn't get reelected for the exact same reason, right? There's people that didn't like him, couldn't stand him, and in comes President Biden. Now, take that away from national politics down to local politics. I think, and I honestly believe this with Lake Forest, a lot of people haven't had to worry about getting involved and learning the behind the scenes details of stuff because our city government works so well, right? Jason Wishes doing a fantastic job in orchestrating everything that needs to happen within the city. He's ensured that he's got the right people in place with the skills and capability to continue to grow into those roles and be part of a succession plan if needed. And I think it's, it's unfortunate that from time to time, people miss out on some of the things that have happened, which creates kind of the dramatic event. And they missed it along the way. But, like the old adage is, you can lead a horse to water. But unless people truly have an interest in it, and many of us, I think probably all four of us on this call, we kind of view politics as a hobby to a certain degree, or we at least used to when I was younger. I voted in every single election since I was 18 also. Now, I'm embarrassed to say I voted for some people I knew absolutely nothing about, whether it's a municipal judge or it's somebody on a ballot that I either need to vote for. I got to pick somebody. Right now, as I've gotten older, I don't pick anybody if I haven't done the homework and understand and know exactly who I'm voting for, right?
Yeah, that is good. I wish more voters did what you say, because in particular, I'm a lawyer, and we've had a lot of problems with elected judges in this area lately. It's just the voters have no idea who they're voting for.
Well, I also like that we don't elect a park board and a library board in Lake.
Yeah, that's a good thing in Lake.
Because those elections. Yeah. Are coming from communities that had elections for that. I mean, that becomes really like inside baseball type thing of, and sometimes I can't even get enough people to run for.
I don't know about inside baseball, but it becomes a log jam where, because of social media, I believe politics is an identity now, unfortunately. Okay. It's not for me. Okay. But for some people, it's like, you're either this or you're that. There's no in between. And
you're
again,
either CNN or you're Fox News. Yeah.
Or
MSNBC.
Or
I'm not MSNBC for the record.
Well, part of it is I hate the news. So I make my own news. Okay. I'm right all the time. But getting back to our treasurer in Lake County, who is that, Joe?
Ollie Kim is your Lake County treasurer.
Okay.
That's the name of her Facebook page.
Okay. Yes. Label me a Republican, but you know what? I'll vote for her. I get her, right?
Yeah.
She can communicate to me. I understand what she's saying. I love the chickens. Great gal. I get it. But unfortunately, because of ideology and identity, it's either you're this, you're that, and there's no discussion in between. That's a downside. Yeah. John, getting back to your point, John, on Ward 2 being did you say it has the least amount of residents in the ward? I don't know the words.
Correct.
Okay. Again, we're a podcast where, look, if we're going to point fingers, we want to try to offer a solution to kind of correct things. It's hard to get volunteers on the caucus, and each ward has exactly 9. John, you don't have to answer, but Joe and Rick, do you think we should adjust the numbers based on the population in the wards? Because if you have a requirement of 9 and really only half show up most of the time, shouldn't we just kind of
have 4, have 5?
Yeah.
John, how many people are there? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but how many people are there in Ward 2?
Gosh.
What are you talking about?
We're going to put it right here.
Don't know, but I'll know when I
didn't know it was that I didn't know it was that many, John. All right, I didn't know it was that few, John. All right, going forward.
Yeah.
So based on the number, I mean, if you we'll leave Ward 2 alone. If you have twice as many people in one ward and half as many in the other, should you have equal representation on the caucus? Just throwing it out there.
Well, is it that dramatic of a difference? Is my question. I mean,
if it's dramatic,
if it's that dramatic,
I've wondered this myself.
If one is twice the size of the other, well, then yes. But if
should they redraw these wards every 10 years?
More, no.
I mean, Chicago redraws the wards.
Hey, Alderman, it's got it. See how he's got his hand up, Joe?
So a couple things. First of all, there has been some conversation about, do we rebalance the wards, right? Because a lot of our growth, as we've talked about already, isn't necessarily coming out of the 2nd ward. It's coming out of the 4th ward or the 3rd ward or depending where you have these developments, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, it's created a little bit of an imbalance. I don't think it's enough to be all that material, but it's certainly enough to take a look at. And Kathy Cerniak is constantly kind of monitoring what that looks like and providing recommendations and suggestions into Jason in terms of when's the right time, what do we do, how do we do it, that kind of thing. The other thing I would say is, registered voters in the city of Lake Forest, we're all a member of the caucus, right? So we all have an opinion we can give. But what we're trying to do is create a structure for the caucus, and that's the caucus's responsibility and business, right? So it's the elected officers of the caucus that sit and take a look to making those changes. And obviously the sitting members in the various wards can have influence over that. So my comment would be, if people are looking, and it's the very first thing I say to a lot of people they're incredibly opinionated, particularly if they like or don't like the caucus. I'm like, well, what do you know about it? Number one, and have you ever served? No. And the answer is, I don't know much about it, and no, I haven't served. Now, Pete, I know your experience was very unique. Let's just call it that.
Yeah.
As a new member in the community. And the minute there's things that occur that you don't like, especially very principled type things, you've got a decision to make. But I think it's really important for people within the community, and back to your point about should we really have 9 members, my vote would be yes, because I don't think it's that difficult to find the needed volunteers with the right intention to be able to help identify knuckleheads like me to be your next alderman necessarily. So it's
that's the last thing you heard, John.
It's complicated at times, but it doesn't always need to be. And I think there are so many really thoughtful people that are on the caucus that have helped create very effective councils going forward. And I would fully expect that that'll continue.
What do you think of the term limits? There's been some question about, because aldermen are term limited, the mayor is term limited, but the boards and commissions are term limited, but the caucus is also term limited.
Yep.
So, I mean, seeing the abuse of power in other communities, like Niles had a mayor for 50 years. Nick Blaze, who ended up going to jail. Those types of excesses the other way. But one of the criticisms we've heard is that you don't have a knowledge base because there's so much turnover that things like a bylaw issue There wasn't what elder statesman in the room to say, wait a second, hold on, guys, you got to do something a little differently here.
I'm a huge fan of term limits. I think it has worked very well for the city of Lake Forest. I've seen in some private settings where it hasn't worked as well. And the best way I can illustrate that, what's a good example? So when I was president of the school advisory council at St. Mary's, we had tons of volunteers, like room moms, for example. We had incredibly talented room moms at every single grade and every single year, but we did have certain amount of moms that got way into it to the point that they were coming to school every single day. And sometimes to be in the classroom, which becomes disruptive. Back to my comment earlier in the podcast. The minute that my role or somebody else's role as a volunteer becomes disruptive, that's a problem. And without term limits, my knowledge, my self-satisfaction of how skillful and talented I am, all of a sudden starts to skew my perspective. And then I start thinking and acting differently. And then I start trying to influence differently, when the reality is that's not how it's designed. So I think, 2 years as an alderman, getting the opportunity to re-up 2 more times if given the opportunity with the caucus, or if I decide to run independently. And some of you guys may take objection to that, but I can tell you, it's far from sexy what we're doing. So hiding stuff, particularly financial stuff or things that we think are going to be good for the community over time, hiding and not sharing that doesn't make any sense. There's no reason, nobody has any motivation to not share appropriate information that is available to the public. You don't want to share anything that's half-baked, right? I'm not going to share or talk out of school on anything that has not come before the board yet, it's not come before city council yet. But that's, I think that's what we're trying to balance. And, some years it's easier than others.
It's all about transition. And that's what I have learned from being a part of the caucus, where there's unresolved issues, okay, like this the bylaws issue. Like right now, you have people that know what's going on that are leaving, and then you have the newcomers club coming in, and they have to weigh in on an issue they don't know really much about, other than what the people that are still there are telling them about. Then you have, if you remember, our buddy Vince Vega from Pulp Fiction, we blew him a ton of crap about making our Ward 3 people go vote out in Vernon Hills. Yes. We torched him, and they said, hey, man, let me come on and let me tell you what happened. He said, hey, man, I was 90 days on a job. I had over 100 places to book, and that's just what happened. Mea culpa. That I get. Yeah. Okay. Same thing with the treasurer. What's her name again, Joe?
Holly Kim is your Lake County treasurer.
That's right. So I don't know if it's because Lake County, I think, has a bigger government than Lake Forest, but I don't get the levels of transparency. And I'm pumping up Democrats.
The caucus is nonpartisan. Let's make that clear here.
That's what the
city is nonpartisan.
Okay. But you know what? In today's day and age, it's either you're this or you're that, and there's no other side. You can pontificate, you can go out to the public and you say this stuff, but behind the scenes, there's clicks. That's where it is. That's Pete Jansen saying that, Alderman John Powers.
So Pete, you say you're pumping up Democrats.
Yeah.
So why is that a bad thing?
It's not.
Right.
It's just I get labeled as a Trump of Lake Forest.
I understand that, and that's where I was going to go. Right. So the perception of the Lake Forest podcast is it's much more conservative leaning. And that may or may not be true. I'm not
absolutely true.
Well, hold on. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on TikTok. I can't even name them all, but I'm not on them. Yeah. And I'm not on them for a reason. I don't need as much as I would like and respect you, Pete, I don't need you pushing information to me nonstop. Even some of my dear friends that I love dearly, they'll share all kinds of emails with me that I don't really need to want to read. And I'm not going to automatically read just because they sent them to me, right?
Right.
Or a friend that says, hey, you didn't like the photo I sent you. Did you get the photo? Yeah, I got the photo, but why do you need me to like it?
Dopamine.
Where's that coming from, right? So back to perceptions and back to, I think, where we are today in terms of how people are digesting all the information that's available is they've got to kind of manage and do their own thing, which again is kind of why I'm talking to you guys. I'm thrilled to answer whatever questions make sense. I'm also thrilled to vote for the best people. And some of those people, you know, may not carry different color flags. And I think that's true in our city. I can honestly tell you, I've not been in a political conversation. The years that I was on the school board never came up once. I didn't know how people voted. Nobody cared how I voted because most of the issues we're dealing with aren't political in nature. They're about trying to make our community better or our school district better. So it's a really tough thing. And I'm not naive. Look, I know what goes on. I know how hard it is to navigate all that stuff. And I know the misinformation that's out there. But if it does one good thing, and all it does is it floats a topic to you, Pete, to put on the next podcast with the next person that's on just to have that conversation, then I think it's a good thing. I think my friend John Trkla is doing the same thing, right? I don't know much about his website and his mission in terms of that platform. I know there's some really good people associated with it. I told him I'm happy to have a conversation with him at any time as well. It's my job as an elected official to try to make myself available, whether it's at Egg Harbor, the Lantern, or on this podcast. It's the role that I've assumed and I volunteered for, right?
John, you got to communicate to all platforms. You're on the conservative one, and Trkla and the Flat Earth Society, they're the liberal platform. It just is what it is.
Well, not all of them. Come on.
I'm sure not all of them either. I know a number of those people, and they are not liberals. No.
Okay, well then they
first guest was from Highland Park, but that's another.
No, but what I'm saying is, look, I don't want to hide things. Okay, yeah, call me Trump, call me conservative, call me whatever it is. Okay, it is what it is. You don't like what we're saying? Come on. We've invited John to come on. We sent him a letter of transparency. Okay, and if they're so transparent, they don't allow comments on their social media pages. Sorry, Alderman John, you brought him up.
We'll come on your show, John. I'll come on. Pete will come on.
Yeah, Joe, you can go on.
You can come see me on the first and third Mondays of the month anytime you want.
Sponsored by Melatonin. Alderman John Powers, thank you so much for coming on to Lake Forest.
Thanks, Alderman. Great to have you.
John, thank you very much.
The Lake Forest Podcast is supported by viewers, listeners, and businesses just like you. Looking for the best pool supplies? Look no further than Dohany's Pool Supplies. With a history dating back to 1967, this family-owned business offers everything families need to keep their pools clean and sparkling, from chemicals to equipment. Plus, customers enjoy free shipping on all orders. Visit Dohany's Pool Supplies today at doheny.com, DOHENY.com, to learn more. Forest Bluff Real Estate Team serves Illinois, Wisconsin, Lake Forest, and Lake Bluff. John Josephitis, Laura Lee Van Fleet, and of course, Michelle Parnell. Get a free market analysis now at forestbluffrealestate.com. For the best cannabis in the world, look no further than Iliad Epic Grow. Owned by Lake Bluff's own Rich Ruzich, they are a cannabis cultivation center focusing on hard-to-find small batch products that will delight both the occasional user and ganjier. When visiting Michigan, ask for it by name. Epic Products, exceptional process. For more information, email info@iliadgrow.com. Havey Communications has been helping first responders arrive safely since 1983. It's owned by Lake Forest owned Mike Havey. Check them out at haveycommunications.com. We'd also like to say we're thankful for our Patreon supporters, Costa, Lance, Otto, RDM, John C., and Helen. Shout out to the Lake Forest Breakfast Group, Broad Stop and Captain Mike's in Kenosha, the Greentown Tavern, and the Frolic Lounge in Waukegan.